Again, thank you all for joining the session today. Should be a really great topic. We're talking about automating the Citrix Health Check process, which is really some cool new technology. Like I was mentioning earlier, we've got George Spiers joining us. He's a former Citrix CTP. I have to say former because technically the program doesn't exist anymore, but he is one of the leading Citrix experts out there. So we're excited to have him. And for those of you in the healthcare space, he's also an Epic ECSA. So again, really knowledgeable. And I think he's going to offer some great insights. And also, fun fact, George has worked with us, with our product team and with our development team on actually building out this automated health check module. So again, really great insights, both from the Citrix expertise and also from helping to build this out. We also have Martin Quinnen, who is one of our client success engineers. So he is our resident Goliath expert, and then myself on the session as well. So we want this session to be engaging. So ask lots of questions. We've got a question and answer panel in your GoToWebinar toolbar. Leverage that, ask your questions. We will try to get to all of them during the session. If there's anything that we don't get to or that we don't have an answer for, we'll certainly follow up with you on that. But go ahead and leverage that at any point during the session. We'll start off with a quick poll. Should take just a minute to launch, and that kind of gives us a level set on where everybody's at in your mindset towards Citrix Health Checks. And then at the end of the session, once everything is over and you X out of it and you leave the webinar, there'll be a quick survey. I think it's 3 questions. If you wouldn't mind just taking just a few seconds to fill that out, it helps us make sure that we're hitting the mark on these sessions and giving you guys what you expect when you register for it. All right, so as far as the session today, like I said, we're going to do a quick poll here in just a minute. And then we're going to jump into just an overall introduction of what exactly is the automated Citrix Health Check and how does it work. But the bulk of the session today is going to be in a demo / use case conversation with George and with Martin, really digging into the technology and talking about the various use cases that helped inspire this module in the first place. So we'll look at things like environment optimization, security vulnerabilities. There's been some recent Citrix news with regards to that, reboot schedules, antivirus optimization, profile management issues, and then redundant configurations. So we'll dig into each of those a little bit further. George has some great stories and use cases and tips and tricks to talk about that as we get into the demo session. And then at the end, like I said, we'll take time for Q&A. So go ahead and leverage that GoToWebinar tool, the Q&A tab in the GoToWebinar toolbar. All right, so quick poll as we get started. Simple question, do you have a Citrix Health Check planned for this year? So let me launch that poll. All right, we'll give everybody just a minute. All right, it's looking like it's about 50-50 where you have one planned or you're considering one versus you don't have one planned at all. It would be interesting to get your feedback as well as why you're not planning on. We'll talk about some reasons why people don't do it. So I'm just curious if you fit the bill with that as well. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll. Like I said, it looks like about 50-50 as far as those of you who are planning on or considering a health check versus those who are not. It's about actually 60-40. All right. Let's get rolling into the content. So there's a number of reasons why health checks don't get conducted at environments. Anything from cost, which is typically speaking a pretty big blocker. They do take typically a lot of time, again, because most cases you're talking about leveraging consultants to do it. Also, they're a snapshot in time versus continuous monitoring. So you go through the cost, you go through the time, you get one point in time sort of image of your environment, and that's it. Then they have to be repeated again if you have any changes to your environment. They also are only focused on Citrix, so they don't look at the broader end user experience. And in most cases, they require Citrix expertise, like deep Citrix expertise. Typically, you're using a consultant for something like that. And if your team does have to get involved from a remediation standpoint, again, it's taking somebody off bench. So you've got things like analyzing the reports. They're conducting the health check, then they're analyzing the reports. And then if you want additional support, there's remediation that's involved. So it becomes a pretty big undertaking in most cases. But time and time again, we're actually called into consulting engagements where they're troubleshooting impossible to find issues that end up being tied to some silly, simple setting or configuration. And that ends up being what the root cause of the issue was. And what it turns into is hours and hours and hours of investigation, sometimes over days, sometimes over weeks. And again, it's often tied to like the littlest little setting. And again, if you've run a health check, you've got that point in time, you've done all the remediation, everything is optimized, any change to your environment can throw any of those components off again. So these are some of the blockers. And I, like I said, about 40% of you were not considering a health check at all. So it would be great just to get your comments, and you can use the chat function. I'd like to know if these are some of the reasons why you haven't done them in the past or aren't considering one. And if these aren't any of the reasons, it would be great to understand what your reasons are as well. So what we're talking about here is an automated health check module. And this is something that's going to provide both that immediate, that point in time that we talked about that is a typical health check, but also ongoing health checks. So we're talking about things like automated configuration and settings checks across the entire Citrix environment and the broader end user experience, reporting on settings that are outside of best practices, and then also including resolution guidance so that you can then remediate, get things back on track. And what that means is you can leverage automation to automatically remediate, or if you don't want to have automation as part of the remediation process for a setting or a configuration, we provide resolution guidance. So you don't have to be a Citrix expert to be able to resolve the issues. That guidance, that step-by-step guidance is listed there. And we'll show you what that looks like when we get into the demo. But again, that's the sort of the immediate point in time. Then there's the ongoing checks. So again, automated configuration and settings checks. So that happens on an automated fashion on whatever cadence you want it to be on. Then you're getting alerts, which those alerts also include fix actions, that automate or that remediation guidance where you could leverage automation or manual, your choice. And then reporting and analytics on the Citrix Health and your overall end user experience. And like I said, we'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute we get into the demo. So how does this actually work? Starts with deploying. You have to deploy the technology. The checks are pre-configured, so there's nothing you have to do to configure the checks into your environment. And really what they are is, if you think of these pre-configured checks, they're really they're preventative. They're looking for issues that don't ever have to become an end user experience issue. So you're finding configuration settings that are out of best practices, and you're getting visibility into those quickly. So an example of that might be like notification bloat in Citrix VDAs. This is something that would manifest possibly as slow logons for end users. These are logons that if you had a health check in place and you had that configured appropriately, those are long logons that never needed to happen. These are the type of things that we're talking about. But after the module is deployed, it's automatically checking for settings, configurations, anything outside of Citrix best practices. And again, it's not just one and done, it's something that can be done continuously so that anytime you have a change to your environment, an update, M&A, you've acquired new hardware, whatever kind of change to your environment, if there are any impacts to your settings and configurations, they're caught before they become a problem. So then as it's performing its checks, it's then alerting and generating alerts when anything falls outside of those best practices. So another example might be if you've got the Citrix VDA high performance power plan. which is ensuring smooth end user experience in high performance environments. If this is misconfigured, end user experience is impacted. So this is a great example of a typically hard to find but easy to fix issue. It's also an example of something that oftentimes leads to a lot of wasted time searching for a root cause of an issue that in the end was tied back to a simple misconfiguration. So going back to the alerting, we're not just alerting. Any checks that come back that have failed, they include resolution guidance. And again, you have options to use automated remediation, or if you want to use manual remediation. Either way, you can choose that, but it includes the guidance to go in step by step and actually resolve the issue to make sure that you're brought back into alignment. This means that you don't have to necessarily have that deep Citrix expertise to resolve the problems. You can task that off to someone else in the IT organization, leaving your Citrix architects and your engineers to not have to come off the bench effectively to resolve some of these issues. And then we have reports that they're displaying the failed checks. Again, in the reports, we'll also have instructions for resolving. Again, we'll show you that in just a minute. And again, this is it's not a typical Citrix Health Check. This is automated. So it's providing the ongoing checks and alerts. It's not a one and done point in time. You don't ever have to worry about misconfigurations again if you're leveraging it. All right, so that's sort of a high level introduction of the health check. Now what I want to do is I want to turn it over to Martin and to George. And we're going to jump into some use cases and talk about some of the experiences that George has had that helped us come together and work on this to automate the process so that we can sort of remove those blockers that most people have for being able to run a Citrix Health Check. All right, so give me just a minute to switch it over to Martin. All right, Martin, you should have presentation rights. There you go. And George, is your audio good?
Yeah, I hope so.
All right, perfect. There we are. All right, so George, do you want to give us just a little bit of a background, before we jump into these use cases of some of the experiences that you've had and what kind of help led to us coming together and building out this automated module?
Yeah, for sure. I think, one of the main reasons, only one of them, but one of the main ones that caused us to develop or even think about developing the health check module is because I've been pulled into many Citrix environments which are often struggling performance-wise. And it turns out that a lot of these environments are not adhering to best practices. Now, that could be a portion or only some. And sometimes I got to confess that sometimes as a Citrix admin and a former CTP, I've seen environments of all different sizes, and I sometimes wrongly assume that every environment has a level of optimizations in place, but that isn't strictly true. And I found it out not actually too long ago when a customer environment that I was working on, it had next to no optimizations in place. Now their environment was suffering from slow logins and poor in-session performance. So again, with that in mind, that's one of the main reasons, Kerry, why we come to develop the health check module for Citrix. There are so many different optimizations that Citrix come out with, and they always come out with new ones when they release new products or new features, etc. So it's difficult for a Citrix admin who is busy doing XYZ day to day to also track all of these different optimizations and keep on top of them. And I know how difficult it is for me to do that. And I am dedicated to Citrix products. We have Citrix admins who maybe not even dedicated to their Citrix platform. They could get pulled into other areas of infrastructure. So yeah, the health check is definitely designed to make Citrix admins' lives easier in that aspect.
So let's jump into some examples, and Martin, you can maybe pull it up in the product of different ways that we can look how the health check will help with optimization, George. And it sounds like you have a good example of maybe how you kind of went in and helped that particular organization.
Yeah, yes, of course. So just following on from that specific client, what I'm not saying that optimizations are going to fix everything. We know that's just not the case. We know that to get a performant environment, we need a lot of things to go in our favor, right? So we need to have an optimally sized environment. We need to be running on performant hardware and a good network, solid network, stable network. We have stable endpoints. They're just, the Citrix stack is so complex, and we have to have a lot of these pieces working well together. But optimizations do play a part, and that's the important piece. They do play a part. They do really help environments run leaner, and they also help environments run more efficiently, and they reduce the risk of issues occurring in the first place. So, Kiri, you did mention preventative, trying to catch these problems before they even occur, and that's another use case of the health check. So we obviously developed, as I mentioned, the health check module, and we checked on a whole bunch of best practice configurations. And from a Goliath end user's perspective, they get this report, which is on screen. And the report shows you exactly what the health check module found, what's unoptimized, what is needing attention, what servers, endpoints, desktops are needing attention, and which are obviously affected. Now, you get the report, you now have some evidence of where you need to remediate. So you've got to remediate this specific optimization or that specific optimization. Then you go and do all of your remediations. But also the module will continue then to check thereafter that optimizations are in place and continue to be in place. So as you mentioned again, Kiri, this isn't a point in time exercise. The module will ongoing check your environments. And also this report is great for upper management because it gives them peace of mind. If you can show a healthy report where everything's optimized and you send that to upper management, that gives them peace of mind that the environment's optimally tuned. So that's really important as well.
That's a great point too, because when you look at this report, the top part, perfect for upper management. Martin was scrolling a little bit. Martin, do you want to kind of walk us through what the bottom part is? Because this is really where you get into the meat of the report and how to fix some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you receive, say, this report comes out of the product automatically on whatever schedule you set the health check to run on, you're going to have on top of the high level analytics of what rates we're passing at, and as George pointed out, how many of our machines need attention. We actually break this out in the report into the individual health checks that we're executing in the Citrix environment. And so for each one, you can see a pass rate, where those machines that need attention are. And then for each one, as you scroll down the report, you'll see each of these checks then listed with more detail. So each of our checks comes out of the box, as Kiri also mentioned, pre-configured, so that we know exactly what to look for, where to look for it. We can tell you exactly where the machines that are missing those configurations are, those specific IDs, and when we ran that check to tell you exactly when we see that, say, failed status here. And then, of course, once you have this list, it's a matter of how do I fix it, which is also packaged right within the health check. You'll see the resolution notes in the title of each health check here to tell you, A, what does this mean? So SMB 1.0, for example, being a security vulnerability, and telling you exactly the significance of why we're looking for this. And then to resolve it, if you'd like to take in a manual, say, approach, you can go ahead and just follow the instructions embedded within each of the health checks. Or of course, you can automate this right alongside the health check. So leverage Goliath's embedded remediation, where we could, for example, run this repair right on the machines as soon as we run this health check. And again, on any frequency, clients will generally do this every 1 to 2 weeks, for example.
All right. And again, if you guys have questions at any point in the session, go ahead and drop those into the question and answer toolbar. All right, we do have one question. Is this health check module, is it from Citrix or is it from Goliath? This is from Goliath, and it's tied to the Citrix environment and end-user experience issues. But it is a separate technology from Citrix. But we work with Citrix. We're a partner of Citrix. We're one of their top 25 partners that are their technology partners, strategic partners. So we work closely together with the Citrix team on development and integration. So, all right, let's jump to the next topic. So, George, you and I were talking about security vulnerabilities the other day because, you know, emails and LinkedIn feeds are full of notices, the in case you missed it notices from everybody sort of doing their public service announcements. Let's talk a little bit about how the health check module can help in general with security vulnerabilities, and then anything you want to share there as far as some of your actual hands-on experience.
Yep, for sure. I think hopefully most people on this call will have been aware of the multiple vulnerability disclosures that were released just feels like 2-3 weeks back. Time absolutely flies, but yeah, I think it's fair to say that in the context of those vulnerabilities, and probably most, to be fair, NetScaler admins definitely feel the most pain. And we can also, I know this isn't a NetScaler health check module webinar, but we can address that with our NetScaler module. But there are also vulnerabilities affecting the Citrix CBAD stack, or virtual apps and desktops, and in particular the VDA software. And there was a VDA vulnerability disclosed just in the past couple of weeks. And you know, in my experience when performing health audits across environments, I find often that Citrix environments are running outdated and sometimes unsupported versions of Citrix, which have vulnerabilities, you know, embedded in those. But with so many vulnerabilities that are found over the years, it does become difficult to know which vulnerabilities are applying to your specific version of CVAD. And also there can be vulnerabilities that maybe only apply to certain components, certain single session OS VDAs or multi-session OS VDAs. And you know, I had a customer recently ask me if they were impacted by the recent vulnerability. And they run VDAs, of course, but it turns out that they weren't impacted because they run multi-session or multi-session VDAs. Now, if that customer had not asked, they could have gone and tried patching their environment thinking that they were vulnerable, but in this case, it wasn't necessary. And you know, Citrix admins have, I'm sure, many more important things to do than yet another round of patching. So we developed the health checks dedicated to detecting old and vulnerable versions of Citrix that are running in your environment. And this on the screen is just one of those checks that we have in the product, which checks the Citrix site version. So that means if you are running CVAD 1912 or another version, for example, and you drop the module into your environment, it'll alert you if you're running a version which is unsupported and vulnerable. Or maybe if you're running a particular version of the VDA, right? Because sometimes the site will have different versions of VDA running within it. Again, the module can detect if there's old VDAs, which again contain vulnerabilities. And what the module really gives the Citrix admin and the organization is peace of mind that your Citrix software, that in a lot of cases is running mission critical apps and data, making sure that that software is secured. So that's the whole reason behind, you know, these health checks that we embed into the module.
And David, I see your question. It's a great question. So George, we've got a question coming in. It says, if you decide that something is an acceptable risk, can you configure the report to ignore or no longer report on that particular item?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, so all of these checks are completely configurable. So like Martin said, they're out of the box. They are pre-configured so that you don't have to configure them to run them. But David, to your point, if there is something that you deem as an acceptable risk and you don't want to report on it or check it, you can, segment those out and not have it checked. You can turn them off, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a great question because not every optimization applies to every environment. Again, optimizations are recommendations; they're not mandates. So absolutely, you can exclude some if they don't apply to your environment.
And Lewis, I see your question as well, your follow-on question. George kind of touched on it, but I'll repeat it for everyone else. The question was, does this health check work on the VDA, or can it also be used for NetScaler, ADC, SDX, VPC, or VPX, etc.? And George had talked about it. This particular health check module does not include NetScaler, but we do have a NetScaler module that can help with some of your visibility into NetScaler. So if that's something you're interested in, happy to take that offline and have a conversation around that. All right, reboot schedules. I think that was the next one that, George, you had some stories around.
It was. People will be going, huh? Reboot schedules? That's like basic 101 stuff, but honestly, when you do as many audits that I've done, anything is possible. So
it's the basic 101 stuff that usually leads us, because when you're troubleshooting, right, you almost overlook that as being the cause, because who would think that would be the cause?
Absolutely. It's kind of like what I said in some of the previous slides, that I sometimes wrongly assume that other environments have certain things because you just think that it's just got to be part of the environment, and you would overlook it, and that's quite concerning as well. So like reboot schedules, a lot of times you would just not even think to check if a delivery group has a reboot schedule, because you just assume that there is one, and it's definitely not always the case. So yeah, you gotta be quite specific and check absolutely everything. But yes, sometimes I do audit environments that have simply either some delivery groups don't have a reboot schedule or none, which is of course worst case, in terms of none of the delivery groups have a reboot schedule. Now, reboot schedules are probably most important for multi-session environments, because you have hundreds, maybe even thousands of users who are logging on and off those VDAs every single day, 24/7. You think of health environments in particular that of course never stop, and you have clinicians that hop from PC to PC, workstation to workstation between wards. Now, when each user logs in, they of course spawn multiple processes during their session. They cache data down to those multi-session servers, and of course over time those servers continue to build up memory consumption, and the disk utilization will go up as well. The other risk that you have is if you're running with a write cache disk, which most Citrix environments do have, the write cache disk will continue to build, and the space could eventually run out on that disk, which will cause those servers to hang. So that's another important element, where if you have a reboot schedule, it clears, of course, the write cache at every single reboot. Some environments could also suffer from user sessions becoming stuck. Yeah, it's actually quite a common problem, where a user session will hang and the Citrix admin can't log it off. So again, in most cases, they need a reboot to solve that specific issue. So I like to think of a reboot schedule, again, as a preventative measure. It helps to avoid ever experiencing those system slowdowns, those write cache exhaustions, and it's just generally good practice to increase server performance. So we've built it, of course, based on that experience. We've built it into the health check module, and it'll go off in alerts. So if you've got any delivery groups which don't have a reboot schedule set, then it will let you know about it. Now, just personal experience, my recommendation for reboots is anywhere from once per day to once per week. any more than a week, I start to become a little bit nervous, let's say. And most organizations, I say most, but a fair few organizations don't operate 24/7. So I often find that customers will take the opportunity to even reboot every weekend, just so that everything's fresh come Monday morning.
That's Georgie and I were laughing a little bit about the whole when we were talking about reboot schedules and sort of the individual responsibility that we have as Citrix users to also log off our sessions instead of just disconnecting all the time. And I was notoriously guilty of doing that when I was using Citrix. Fun fact, used to work at Citrix, spent 8 years there. And I spent a lot of time in the IT cafe trying to figure out why my sessions were slow, to find out that I wasn't logging off. So reboot schedules, something on a broader scale, becomes, like you said earlier, it's something that most everybody on the call knows is supposed to happen, thinks probably that it is happening, but then how often does it not happen, and it's causing issues, and you're troubleshooting one-off issues in the end that were tied to something simple like rebooting. So
yeah, I mean, it even happens to my personal computer, and I have a 20-core PC, 64 gigs of RAM. Now, I don't reboot a lot because I have so much stuff open, and I'm just lazy. I don't want to have to close everything, reopen everything. I'm forced to reboot on a monthly cadence due to Windows patches, of course, but I even experience on the PC that is quite well spec'd. I do experience slowdown as well, and even when I look at the task manager, memory is low and CPU is low, disk is low, but it's still more sluggish. And you reboot, everything just gives a little bit more life to the PC. So yeah, it's not just Citrix environments that we do this for.
I do. So we're going to just switch the order here for just a minute. I'm going to call it an audible, and I want to jump right to the identifying profile management issues. We'll come back to antivirus, but there was a question that came in specifically around logon. So I thought that it might be a good time to jump into profile management issues, and then we'll come back to antivirus.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, it's a hot topic in every Citrix environment. Profiles and profile management, it's always tricky to get right and I think it's because we have a lot of different options, a lot of different considerations. You have container-based solutions, which are the newer concept that came around. Sort of FS Logics was known first for container-based solutions. Now Citrix has the same. But you also have options for file-based solutions. And then you have a whole bunch of different policies, a lot of different settings that can be configured, can be turned on, can be turned off. There isn't a one single set of policies that apply to everyone. So I think that complexity can make it challenging to get the right profile solution. And, I find a lot of times during my assessments that profile solutions are not optimally configured. And, often user frustration, tickets to the help desk, a lot of the time stem from long login times. And that can also be painful for people like myself, Citrix admins, to troubleshoot slow logins. It's not that easy. And I think, again, because there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different components that need to work together well to achieve the best performance possible. And good logins like storage speed, network speed, file server speed, and so on. And there is so many steps in the login process now. There are over 30 different steps, and a good plug here is Go Live Performance Monitor tracks 33 plus steps of the login process. So to try and do that without a product, a specific Citrix monitoring product, would be near impossible. So to help with the challenge of profiles and making sure they are optimally configured, we want to make sure that any best practice, specific best practice around profile management, can be alerted on via the health check module. So Citrix has a number of best practice recommendations around Citrix profile management, and one is the profile streaming policy, which is what you see on the screen. And this policy setting is recommended for better login performance. And what it does is it streams the profile. So instead of fetching the entire profile during login, it only fetches what is needed. So it's very selective in what it needs. Now, obviously, this has a positive impact on user logins, and it reduces IOPS demand. If you think of if I go to a file server and say, give me a 200, 300 meg, 500 meg profile, it's going to consume a lot more resource than it would be if I was to say, give me a 50 meg profile, or give me just the bits I need, which amounts to 50 meg or whatever. So hopefully that sort of makes it a bit easier to understand the benefits of this. And, you know, as well, during a login storm, when there's hundreds of people logging in at 9 a.m., that demand is at its maximum. So again, profile streaming can help just minimize the amount of demand at that time. So what the health check module does is if you don't have the profile streaming policy settings set, then it's going to alert you. And there are also other best practices, as I mentioned, for profile management. And the health check module will also cover those settings as well.
So Martin, I'm going to ask you, so you've been kind of showing what these checks look like. You're showing the remediation that is part of each check. Of course, you see that in the report. You see that in the alert, in the check itself as well. Martin, there's two places I want you to go. I want you to talk, or, you know, describe a little bit how we can choose between automated versus manual, you know, talk about that for just a second. But then I also want to, George had mentioned drilling into logon issues, so I want to show that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have seen me just kind of tabbing through the top level information on these health checks as George has been going through all the kind of the use cases and applications of these, where you've got your what's going to appear on the report, right? So our title and description, as well as that remediation information. Each of these health checks can be configured additionally, as we've mentioned. So in answer to the question from earlier, the ignoring a rule, for example, if you find it's an acceptable risk, it's as easy as a check mark right here to be able to go ahead and disable that rule either temporarily or just moving forward. Additionally, as we get into things like the remediation, you can always follow, as I mentioned, the steps that would be right in here. And if there's additional steps specific to your environment, you can always come in and add those so they can be passed to other members on your team to make a little bit more sense. And then, of course, from the automated perspective, following on the automated health check, we can always automatically remediate these configurations as well. So something like the profile streaming policy, all we would need to do is come over to something like the remediation tab here, where you can go ahead and tell Goliath to, say, for example, run our program on a particular machine, whether it's third party or if it's just on the machines where we found the policy disabled, to go ahead and enable it. We would simply select that monitored server and go ahead and put in our information here. Say, for example, running a PowerShell script, information to go ahead and put in those commands. So it's as easy as that to package that right into the health check so that when it runs, it can automatically remediate. And then, of course, alongside the health check and visibility that's going to give you into the optimizations in the environment, Goliath's going to be able to help you understand what kind of an impact, say, for example, you find this is out of place, we go ahead and remediate. All right, what kind of impact have we had on user experience as a result? The user experience monitoring in the product is going to be able to give you that direct reflection in real time of what user experience looks like and how it's been impacted just by jumping into one of the main pages of the technology. I've got pulled up here, say, for example, a long logon that occurred here, say 75 seconds that occurred. We can see all 33 plus stages, as we mentioned, of the logon process, from initial brokering of the session all the way through to things like the authentication and application of group policies. So if any of these sorts of things, say, for example, a streaming policy is not applying correctly or something like that we're seeing, we could see the direct impact on users here. And of course, profile load times as a result, this being a highlight I was actually on with one of our customers just earlier today, where we were taking a look at some of the profile information within the logins, and we were seeing a slew of users who had 90+ second logons, 85 seconds of which we were able to see directly down here, just a big bar next to the profiles, letting us know that the profile load stage was actually the one that was causing that type of a problem. So we can see where those users are being impacted. And of course, after we apply the health check, exactly how that looks moving forward, looking in those direct logins as well.
And then two, also, just for some additional support as well, if there are other questions with respect to where issues could be or what root cause might be, we do have an AI troubleshooting assistant that is part of it as well. So again, we're trying to simplify and automate as much as we can to reduce the workload, but also from a Citrix architect, from a Citrix engineer perspective, being able to move things to other tiers within the organization. So leveraging things like AI troubleshooting assistants helps with that, because again, it reduces the need to have that deep Citrix level expertise to go in and find and resolve issues. I don't want to get detracted and go into a full product demonstration. I want to stick with the topic at hand, health checks. But because the question came in around logons and this is all tied to profile management issues, I wanted to make sure that we sort of tied those two pieces together. All right, we are getting close on time, so let's move on to antivirus optimization.
For sure. Yeah, and I like to think this one is an awareness check. We're making you aware simply in this case if Defender is running in your environment or not. And I'll explain why it can sometimes matter. And it's again an experience that I've endured. It's some pain that I've endured recently, and I want to ensure that you don't experience the same. And that's, a lot of these health checks are based on real life experiences, which make them, I guess, a lot more valid as well. So one of the things, as I mentioned, this checks simply is if Defender is running in your environment or not. Now, again, based on my real life experience, I had a customer, they were running an on-premises CVAD environment. They had CrowdStrike as their corporate antivirus. Everything was working fine. They had to migrate to public cloud. That's not just Citrix Cloud, but the actual public cloud for their VDA. So as part of moving to cloud, they had to deploy new Windows-based servers in the cloud and install the VDA software, install their apps, all the usual stuff. Now, what they noticed initially during their move to cloud was login times were much slower compared to on-premises. And initially, they couldn't quite determine why that was. So I was engaged, and through some manual investigations, it was discovered that during the login phase for any user, CPU was sitting at 100% for a good portion of the login. So right away, we knew this is why logins are slow, of course, because the CPU is pegged at 100%. But why is the CPU pegged at 100%? And we discovered that CPU consumption was caused by Microsoft Defender. Now, that's where things took a little bit of a turn, because as I mentioned, the customer ran CrowdStrike as their corporate AV. So they were thinking, well, why do we have CrowdStrike and Microsoft Defender running? So they took the decision to disable Defender, and that obviously resolved the problem. So rather than having two AV products running at the same time, they just had their corporate AV. But that was different from on-prem. This is one of the, again, benefits of the health check is that on-premises, they had a policy which explicitly disabled Defender. When they moved to cloud and redeployed those new servers into a different OU, or AD organizational unit, to be clear, that policy was not linked to the new OU. So Defender render came enabled in the OS as it obviously does. So that's how they ended up having the scenario where two AVs were running at the same time. And that's again why the health check is really useful, because it's not point in time. Environments always change. So you might have an environment which is optimized today and it's unoptimized tomorrow because you've made a change, whether it be an upgrade, whether it be a patch, whether you move to cloud. And that's exactly what this customer experienced. So the health check module is always running. It doesn't rest. It's always running, comparing your environment to the latest best practice configurations.
All right, before we jump into the last one, which is redundant configuration, we've got lots of great questions coming in. Keep them coming. We're going to take a few minutes for Q&A here in just a minute. But just a reminder to use the GoToWebinar, the question and answer panel in the GoToWebinar toolbar. Also, Claudia, shout out to Claudia. She's running in the background. She's providing some links in the chat. So thank you, Claudia, for working in the background and keeping the logistics going. But if this is something that you'd like a little bit more information on, feel free to either click one of the links in the chat that Claudia has dropped in there, or you can just, type interested in the chat or the Q&A panel, and we'll go ahead and follow up with you and give you some more information. All right, so last use case before we jump into Q&A, redundant configurations.
Yep, and again, it's one of those ones that you kind of assume is in hand, but in a lot of cases it's not. Now, this one isn't, I wouldn't necessarily class this as user impacting, but it's more Citrix admin impacting, and it could have a cost implication to it as well. Again, pretty much every single time I've did an assessment of an environment, I've always found redundant configuration. That could be old delivery groups, empty application groups, disabled policies, or you may even have policies applying to machines or delivery groups which no longer exist. So you see a bunch of random characters like a GUID because the object's been deleted. I see that a lot, and I'll even hold my hand up. Housekeeping isn't something that I'm great at. It's clearly not something that a lot of us in IT are great at. I guess we have a lot more important things to do, so I absolutely respect that. But the other sort of angle as well is I think we can be a little bit anxious when it comes to deleting something in case we delete the wrong thing and cause a outage or something like that. So with that said, there are a couple of reasons why housekeeping is important. First and foremost, obviously, it's just best practice to do a bit of housekeeping. You could do it once per year, maybe twice per year, so you're not having to do it all the time. But it also just makes environments easier to manage. So instead of looking at a console which is filled with all sorts of applications, delivery groups, things suddenly become a little bit daunting. And you think if you're a junior administrator and you're looking at a console full of config, it can certainly be a bit daunting. So, if you have a lot of config that you don't need, you can make that console look a bit more simpler. It's also important when you're migrating. So if you migrate to a new, migrate to Citrix Cloud, that's a pretty good example. So you're on-prem CVAD, you migrate to Citrix Cloud. You definitely don't want to be wasting migration time with objects that aren't needed in your environment. So you really want to do some upfront housekeeping on the source environment so that you're not bringing all that stuff into cloud. And I mentioned cost implications. When we think about public cloud, you're paying on a consumption basis. So if you have old delivery groups, old machines that are lying in your environment in public cloud, you're still getting charged for those. Even if they're powered off, there's still a small consumption fee. So again, housekeeping can actually save money in that specific scenario when it comes to public cloud. So right away, the module can detect things like empty delivery groups, empty machine catalogs, etc. This specific module or check on the screen is for delivery group member count. So if you have an empty delivery group, it's going to tell you about it in order to remove it. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways where the health check can help detect configuration which it believes is redundant, and it will make that aware, make you aware of it, so that you can then take the decision to either keep the object or get rid of it.
All right, we have a couple additional, we've got several questions, but a couple tied to this specific topic, George. The first one is does it check just on-prem or does it do cloud components as well?
It does both.
Does both, so on-prem and cloud components. And then the second one is, April, I see, does this tool have to be used in a cloud environment or can it run on-prem or an air-gapped environment?
Yeah, it can certainly run against on-prem CVAD, and it can run in Citrix against Citrix cloud environments as well.
Okay. All right, we're going to shift gears into Q&A. Like I said, you guys have been active in the Q&A panel, so we'll get to your questions. First one that we have, I would have got to it earlier, it just wasn't tied to one of the specific checks, so please don't feel like I didn't value your question. Can this be, or do we provide this as a service? So yes, this is something that can be provided as a service. We talked about this at the beginning of the webinar, that in most cases when organizations are doing the Citrix Health Checks, they're using some sort of a consultancy to do that. Yes, this can be provided as a service. It's also something you can do on your own, or a hybrid mix. We can help you with the process. But it's your module, so it's not something that has to be sort of a one and done thing. So yes, services are definitely a possibility. There was a related question to that as well. If you want to use a consultant, can the consultant use this health check to help with the process? And the answer to that is yes as well. So if you've got the module stood up in your environment, then of course you can leverage whomever you would like to help you with that process, analyze the data, help with the remediation, etc. Parvesh, any kind of customization possible? I'm not sure specifically what type of customization you're talking about, but George, Martin, anything you would add as far as the ways that they can kind of customize, modify, select, deselect, add instructions, etc.?
I can certainly comment just from the possibility within the product. It's fully customizable, from adding a health check right into the module if you've got something specific you want to look for that we're not already checking with the pretty comprehensive set that we have, to, as I think I mentioned, coming in to say the remediation and making things a little bit more specific, so that, say, if this report is handed to your tier 1 or tier 2 teams, they'd be able to take that action before needing to, say, escalate any sort of a remediation action. Anything like that is all absolutely possible within the product.
Okay. All right, David, excellent question. Says the module looks good, but you're not seeing anything Epic specific. So David, we do have a separate Epic Health Check module as well. As you know, Epic and Citrix, or any EHR application, is tied heavily to Citrix. So this is one component of it. But David, happy to follow up with you on the specific Epic issues. But like I said, we have an Epic Health Check module as well that we can go into some details with you offline on that. So sorry that you didn't see that on this one, but that is definitely something that we do address as well. All right, Martin, George, this is a good one for you. Are there any limitations to the size of the Citrix environment that we can monitor and check?
No, there is not. No, wherever there's an agent, we can run those checks against that machine, whether it be a VDA, delivery controller, cloud connector, storefronts, your typical Citrix components, and it doesn't matter how many you have.
Okay, perfect. I have two that are similar, related. First one is, which version of Citrix does this handle, and the second piece, which is related to it. So I'm going to just pop them both out there. George, you can answer these both together. So which version of Citrix is included in the health checks, and how are changes handled over time? So in other words, when vendor guidance changes or new versions are introduced, how is that handled over time?
Yeah, so in terms of the versions, we're not specific to any versions. What we actually do call out, as mentioned earlier in the webinar, is if you have old versions. So we'll be looking at your specific editions or versions of Citrix, and if they're out of support, if they're outdated, the product will alert you on that. So there's not a specific version that you must have for these modules to work. In terms of guidance and changes, yes, you're right. Vendors always change guidance, particularly with new features. I think it's quite important if there's a new release of a product. The vendor might have particular guidance. Then when that product starts to mature, and maybe they see some real life use cases and experiences, they change that guidance a little bit to suit any updates. And what we do is we will review documentation and release notes and everything around guidance and best practice changes. We review that and put it into the product, and that's done on a quarterly basis.
Okay, and so just to kind of follow on that as well, so when you say it's not tied to specific versions, what we are saying is that as new versions are released, those are introduced into the module, and so therefore we're constantly checking for out of support as versions kind of fall out of support. Is that a correct statement?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
There are a couple questions. We're just about right at time. There are a couple of questions around how heavy of a lift is this to actually get stood up in an environment. That's my paraphrase of all the questions. I'll take this one super quick, Martin. If you're already a Goliath customer, it takes probably, correct me if I'm wrong, about 15 minutes, Martin, to get this thing up and running in your environment. So it's really, really easy to get rolling with it if you're a Goliath customer. If you're not already a Goliath customer, then you're talking about maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours to get this deployed in your environment once you have all your prerequisites met. So happy to have further conversations around that. If you're interested in a demo or a trial, or you'd like to talk to us about having this done as a service, you can always reach out to us at techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. Of course, there are links in the chat as well that you can just click on and put your information in there. When you run the health checks, you're going to get deployment included. Post-check analysis will be included with that. Remediation instructions are included, and you'll be able to get visibility into before and after end user experience impacts as well. So a lot included, a lot more details than what we had time to go into today. All right. Our next session is going to be on August 21st. So join us for our next troubleshooting topic, August 21st. You'll have a link for that sent to you as well to register. Again, happy to answer any additional questions you have, so please continue to reach out. And thank you all for joining. George, thanks so much for your time today. And Martin, thanks for sort of driving the demo portion as well. And of course, Claudia, working in the background, thank you for making sure the logistics happen. So I appreciate your time, everyone, and we will talk soon.
Thank you, everyone.